This place was discovered by cavers in 1994 and then closed off to the public immediately.
Hidden beneath the limestone cliffs of southern France lies a cave, unlike any other on Earth. For more than 30,000 years, it remained completely sealed, untouched by the outside world. But on a Sunday afternoon in December 1994, three friends walking along those cliffs noticed something strange. A thin stream of cool air was slipping through a crack barely wide enough to fit a hand. As the group removed the stones and made their way inside, they discovered ancient paintings, human footprints, animal tracks, and torch marks that would rewrite the history of early humans. This is the story of Chauvet Cave, and how one tiny crack in a cliff led to one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in history. Let's dive in. The sealed cave. Before we can understand the paintings, we first need to understand the people who found them, and the place they accidentally uncovered. Jean-Marie Chauvet, Eliette Brunel, and Christian Hilaire weren't strangers to caves. All three were experienced speleologists who had spent years exploring the gorges of the Ardèche River in southeastern France. They knew this landscape better than almost anyone. On December 18, 1994, they were investigating a small, already known cave near a hiking trail above the Ardèche Gorge. Nothing about it looked unusual. Then, all of a sudden, Jean-Marie Chauvet noticed something unusual. A faint stream of cool air was slipping through a crack in the rock. The opening was far too small for a person to squeeze through, and most people would have walked right past it. But experienced cavers know that air doesn't move through solid rock. If a steady breeze is coming from a narrow crack, it usually means there's a much larger empty space hidden behind it. That tiny draft changed everything. The three of them started digging. Rock by rock, they widened the opening until there was enough room to slip through. On the other side, their flashlights hit nothing but darkness, stretching out in every direction. They didn't have the equipment to go any further that day. So they climbed back out, went home, and came back that same night with ropes and a ladder. None of them could have imagined what they were about to see. Eliette Brunel was the first to enter the newly opened passage. As she slowly swept her flashlight across the wall, she suddenly froze. Two curved red lines appeared on the stone. They weren't cracks. They weren't stains. They had been painted. Quietly, she turned to the others and said, "They have been here." She wasn't talking about animals. She meant people, ancient people who had stood in that exact spot tens of thousands of years earlier. As they moved farther in that first night, the images kept multiplying. Red dots, handprints, then full animals, painted with a confidence that felt wrong for something this old. The paintings didn't look crude or primitive. They were bold, carefully planned, and surprisingly lifelike. Every few steps revealed something new, making it clear they weren't looking at a handful of drawings. They had entered an underground art gallery unlike anything anyone had ever seen. The cave would later be named Chauvet Cave, after Jean-Marie Chauvet, although Eliette Brunel and Christian Hilaire stood beside him throughout every moment of the discovery. 10 days later, French heritage officials were notified. Jean Clot, the Ministry of Culture's leading specialist in Paleolithic art, was sent to verify the find on December 29, 1994. By January 18, 1995, the Ministry of Culture had confirmed what the three cavers already suspected. They hadn't just found another decorated cave. They had found something that didn't match anything on record. But before scientists could understand what they had discovered, they first had to answer two questions. How old were these paintings, and how had they remained so perfectly preserved for tens of thousands of years? A time capsule. To answer those questions, an international team of archaeologists, geologists, and dating specialists launched one of the most extensive scientific investigations ever carried out. The project was led by Jean Clotet, while physicist Hélène Valladas headed the radiocarbon dating program. Working with laboratories across France and abroad, her team carefully collected more than 250 tiny samples from the cave. When these samples were analyzed, the results left everyone shocked. Because the ancient people hadn't visited the cave just once, they had returned during two separate periods. The first lasted from about 37,000 to 33,500 years ago. Then, after a gap of several thousand years, people came back again between roughly 31,000 and 28,000 years ago. But sometime near the end of that first period, the landscape began to change. Geologists studying the entrance believe an early rockfall blocked part of the cave, making it much harder to enter. Then, not long after the second group of visitors left, two more major rockfalls completely buried the entrance. From that moment on, the cave disappeared. After the final collapse, almost nothing bigger than an insect could reach the chambers beyond. For most archaeological sites, something like this would have been a disaster. But here, it did something impossible. That collapsed entrance transformed the cave into something incredibly rare. A perfectly sealed vault. For more than 20,000 years, rain never touched the paintings. Wind never faded the pigments. Animals never walked across the cave floor, leaving fresh tracks or knocking rocks onto the walls. Even the cave's temperature and humidity remained remarkably stable. As researchers slowly documented everything inside, they realized they weren't simply exploring another prehistoric cave. They were looking at a perfectly preserved time capsule. And once they understood just how extraordinary the cave was, they knew they had to document every inch of it. Mapping the cave. That enormous task was led by Jean-Michel Geneste, who succeeded Jean Clotet as Chauvet Cave's scientific director. But exploring the cave wasn't as simple as walking inside. The paintings had survived for tens of thousands of years because the cave's environment had never changed. Even a small rise in temperature or humidity could damage them. So researchers worked under strict limits. And then there was another problem. The cave was far larger than anyone had imagined. From the outside, it looked small. Inside, it stretched for about 400 meters through a series of connected chambers and passageways. Almost every section revealed something extraordinary. Researchers eventually documented more than 1,000 paintings and engravings, along with hundreds of individual animal figures covering the walls. But what truly caught their attention wasn't just the number of paintings, it was what the artists chose to paint. Most Ice Age caves across Europe are filled with animals people hunted for food: horses, deer, and bison. But Chauvet was completely different. Alongside horses, mammoths, and woolly rhinos were some of the most dangerous predators of the Ice Age. The walls were covered with cave lions, cave bears, hyenas, and even a leopard, animals that almost never appear in prehistoric art from this period. When the team counted all the animals, one pattern stood out. Out of every 3 animals painted inside Chauvet, nearly one was a dangerous predator. That couldn't be a coincidence. Whoever painted these walls chose these animals deliberately. But the walls were only part of the story. The cave floor had remained almost untouched as well. The soft clay still held the paw prints of cave bears, along with the shallow hollows where they had once slept. Researchers also found fossilized bones, including complete bear skulls and the curved horns of an ibex. Then came one of the most shocking discoveries in the entire cave. Pressed into the clay was a trail of footprints left by a child. Running beside them was another set of tracks, possibly made by a wolf or an early dog. Those footprints looked as if that child had walked through the cave only yesterday. At this point, one thing was becoming clear. The people who created Chauvet weren't leaving behind simple drawings. They were leaving behind evidence of a world and a level of artistic skill that scientists were only beginning to understand. The incredible paintings. For decades before Chauvet Cave was discovered, most experts thought they already understood how prehistoric art had developed. The idea came from the French prehistorian André Leroi-Gourhan. In 1965, he proposed that artistic skill evolved slowly over time. According to his model, the earliest humans began with simple, crude drawings. Only thousands of years later did they learn to create realistic, detailed art. For almost 30 years, that idea went largely unchallenged until researchers looked closely at Chauvet's walls. And suddenly, the theory no longer made sense. Prehistorian Carol Fritz and archaeologist Gilles Tossello, who spent years studying the cave, discovered that the artists hadn't simply painted on bare rock. First, they carefully scraped the wall clean, creating a lighter background that made the black charcoal and red ochre stand out. Then, they used the natural curves and bumps of the limestone to give the animals muscles, depth, and a three-dimensional appearance. Instead of treating the wall like a flat surface, they made it part of the artwork. But the surprises didn't stop there. Jean Clotes and researcher Marc Azema studied several panels where animals were drawn with extra legs or a second head. At first, the drawings looked strange, but under the flickering light of a torch, those overlapping shapes create the illusion of movement. The animals appear to run, turn, or lift their heads. It's one of the earliest known examples of artists deliberately creating something that looks almost like animation. But the surprises didn't end there. Archaeologists noticed large red dots scattered across the cave walls. When these dots were analyzed, they discovered they had been made by pressing ochre-covered palms directly against the stone. By comparing the size and shape of the prints, the team concluded they came from at least two different people. One was about 5 feet 9 inches tall. The other was noticeably smaller, possibly a woman or an adolescent. By now, one thing had become impossible to deny. None of this matched the old idea of primitive beginnings. These were people who already knew how to create sophisticated art, using techniques far ahead of what anyone thought was possible for their time. But who were the people who created these drawings, and what was their purpose? To answer those questions, the team first had to determine how old the paintings really were. The age of paintings. As you already know, the radiocarbon dating program had revealed that the cave was visited during 2 different periods and later sealed by rockfalls. But by the early 2010s, more than 80 separate radiocarbon analyses had independently verified those findings. Then, in 2016, an international team led by Anita Quiles, together with Hélène Valladas, Jean-Claude Jean-Michel Geneste, Julien Monet, and other researchers, combined those dating results with geological evidence from the rockfalls that sealed the cave. The conclusion changed everything. Some of Chauvet's black drawings were found to be around 36,000 years old. That made them among the oldest confirmed figurative paintings ever discovered anywhere on Earth. It also forced researchers to rethink a long-standing assumption. If humans could create art this sophisticated 36,000 years ago, then the traditional view of primitive artists gradually learning their craft could no longer hold up. These were people living through the Ice Age. They hunted dangerous animals to survive. Yet, they still found the time, the tools, and the creativity to produce art of extraordinary quality. But why did they come here, to this remote place? to create these drawings. Many researchers on Jean-Michel Geneste's team now believe Chauvet was probably never a place where people lived. The evidence simply isn't there. Scientists haven't found the thick layers of everyday waste, cooking areas, or long-term living spaces that would be expected in a permanent settlement. Instead, many believe people traveled to the cave for a different reason. They may have come to Chauvet for one reason: to create these paintings. That has led many researchers to believe the cave was a place of ritual or spiritual importance, rather than an ordinary home. Jean Clotat has suggested one possible explanation. He believes some of the paintings may be connected to shamanistic rituals. According to his theory, the artists believed the rock wall separated the human world from the spirit world, and painting on it was a way of reaching or communicating with the forces beyond it. Whether that's true, no one knows. And then there's the time gap. Humans didn't visit Chauvet just once. The first period of activity lasted from about 37,000 to 33,500 years ago. Then, after a gap of nearly 5,000 years, another group returned between roughly 31,000 and 28,000 years ago. To put that into perspective, 5,000 years is longer than the entire span of recorded human history. Yet somehow, people found their way back to the exact same hidden cave. Why? Perhaps the location and its traditions were passed down through nearly 200 generations. Or perhaps a completely different group discovered the cave on their own and felt compelled to leave their own paintings beside artwork they had no way of knowing already existed. Even after decades of research, no one knows which explanation is correct, or who the people behind these paintings really were, and what inspired them to create one of humanity's oldest masterpieces. The search for the missing story. Once Chauvet proved that art this advanced existed 36,000 years ago, researchers began asking a new question. Was Chauvet truly one of a kind, or was it simply the first cave anyone had found? That question led scientists beyond Chauvet itself. Interestingly, this region had already produced important discoveries. In 1985, nearly a decade before Chauvet was found, Christian Hilaire, one of the cave's 3 original discoverers, helped uncover another decorated cave in the same Ardèche gorge. That suggested Chauvet might not be an isolated discovery. It could be part of a much larger Ice Age landscape filled with prehistoric art. To find out, researchers expanded their search. Starting in 2008, teams working under geomorphologist Julien Monet and geographer Jean-Jacques Delanoy began studying other decorated caves across the Ardèche Gorge. Among them were Deux Ouvertures Cave and Ulen Cave. Researchers compared the drawings, engravings, and painting techniques found there with the artwork inside Chauvet. Soon, some striking similarities began to emerge. They suggested that the same culture, or at least closely related groups of people, may have decorated several caves across the Ardèche thousands of years ago. In other words, Chauvet might not represent a single extraordinary event. It could be one surviving piece of a much larger artistic tradition. But proving that is slow work. The Ardèche Gorge stretches for miles through steep limestone cliffs filled with sinkholes, hidden tunnels, and underground chambers. To truly solve this mystery, scientists will need to explore, map, and study many more of the hidden caves beneath these cliffs before they can reach a definitive answer. But while that search continues, another question remains. What is happening to Chauvet Cave itself, the place no one can see? The moment the world learned about Chauvet Cave, a new challenge began. How do you protect something this fragile? Researchers already knew what could happen if they got it wrong. The same thing had happened at Lascaux Cave. Discovered in 1940, Lascaux was opened to the public for several years. At first, everything seemed fine, but thousands of visitors slowly changed the cave's delicate environment. Their body heat, their breath, and even the artificial lights caused mold and green algae to spread across paintings that had survived for more than 17,000 years. Eventually, the damage became so severe that Lascaux had to be closed. Scientists were determined not to let history repeat itself. So, almost immediately after Chauvet was discovered, French authorities closed it to the public. More than 30 years later, it remains closed. Only Jean-Michel Geneste's research teams are allowed inside each year. Even they work under strict rules, spending only limited hours in the cave to avoid changing its temperature or humidity. But there was still one problem. How could millions of people experience Chauvet without putting the real cave at risk? The solution was ambitious. Instead of opening the original cave, France decided to build an exact full-scale replica nearby. Known as Caverne du Pont d'Arc, the project began in 2012. Around 500 specialists, including artists, architects, engineers, and special effects designers, worked together to recreate the cave. Using more than 6,000 reference photographs and dozens of high-resolution digital scans, they copied everything from the paintings to the smallest cracks and bumps in the rock. Even the colors were carefully matched, after geomorphologists from the University of Savoie studied the exact tones of the original cave walls. The replica opened on April 25, 2015, after costing more than $62 million to build. Within its first year, it attracted hundreds of thousands of visitors. Since then, more than 1 million people have walked through its recreated chambers. Meanwhile, the real Chauvet Cave remains exactly as nature left it, hidden in darkness, protected from light, breath, and footsteps. The same conditions that preserved its paintings for tens of thousands of years continue to protect them today. And unless those rules change, the original cave is a place that almost no one will ever be allowed to enter. Outro. For more than 30,000 years, the cave remained sealed like a time capsule, protecting an entire piece of the Ice Age until it was finally opened again. That makes you wonder, if one accidental rockfall preserved more than 30,000 years of history, how many more discoveries are still hidden beneath our feet, waiting for the right moment to be found? Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more incredible stories like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.